Hello, BookTube. I know this is a bit unusual for me. I normally do not do lives by myself, but I haven't really done any recent reads videos lately, and I thought I would just pop in and kind of catch up on what I've been reading lately. Um, I guess the first thing I'll talk about is Verity. And before I start talking about Verity, I do want to say this will be full of spoilers because I am going to get into kind of what issues I had with the book. I know I did a little 60-second review on it, but I didn't really get too in depth on that. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to do that. And sorry, Stephen, no snacks and beverages. I hate to disappoint there. Um, hello. Good. Hey, Brad, how are you? Good to see you. Good to see you. That's actually a former student of mine right there. A very good history student, might I add. And Alan, really good to see you. And I loved your rendition of Blackbird, by the way. I saw that. So, all right, Stephen, we will get into this Verity thing here. So, Verity by Colleen Hoover. Obviously, it's all over BookTube. It's everywhere, and it's not a very recent book. I mean, I want to say it was published a few years ago, and it's still kind of creating a buzz, I guess. And any book. Of course, I'm a librarian, so any book that makes people want to read, I think, is wonderful. I think that that's saying something about the book right there. And the book was easy to read, so I can definitely see why it has so much mass appeal. But, I had some issues with it. So let me start by saying I do have a little bit of a history with Colleen Hoover. So I did read a few of her romance books back in the day. When I say back in the day, I want to say I may have even still been in college. I'm not sure, or pretty soon after college. So I do have some experience with her before. And, the books I read by her previously, I can see um, their footprint in this book. I know that Verity is supposed to be a psychological thriller, but there were so many parts of the book I think that were kind of bleeding over from her romance writing. And I think for me, it was a bit problematic. So essentially, what we have here with Verity is this character, Lowen. She is kind of a down on her luck 30 something author. And her mother just passed away. She just took care of her mother, who was suffering from cancer. She is kind of awkward in that she doesn't want to do any publicity for her books. So that puts her in a really interesting position because she can't really market for her books because she's not going out there and getting after it. So she's making some money, but she's not um she doesn't really seem to be well known. She doesn't really seem to be um super successful. So with that being said, the whole plot line to me kind of made no sense. It made no sense that this relatively unknown author would then be tapped by this best-selling author to finish their series. So Verity is this very popular author who has been in a car accident and is unable to fulfill her contract. So she still has a few books left in her series, and Lowen is tapped to finish that series. So to start, I found that kind of preposterous. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. Sure, maybe this author read this, obscure book and was touched by it and wanted Lowen to to continue her own series. I don't know. I feel like that setup was kind of off for me. So on the way to this big meeting at this publishing company to negotiate this contract, Lowen has this very traumatic encounter on the street. Essentially, she sees a man being run over by a car in a very just graphic scene in the book. So she sees this man die on the street. And that kind of throws her into the arms of this random stranger who happens to be very handsome. And that's where Jeremy enters the picture. Now, Jeremy is Verity, the accomplished author's husband, and so they're actually going to the same meeting. So Lowen and Jeremy end up at this meeting at the publishers. And so this was a very weird, cute meet. Um, I guess they were supposed to bond over the trauma of this scene. But I don't know, it was just kind of an odd setup for their meeting because in the end they have a romance. And so, for me, the writing would be on the wall if we're talking about red flags, of how we met, I don't know. It just seemed very odd. And Stephen, you're right. Genre trading can be difficult. This is, from what I understand, Colleen Hoover's first attempt at a thriller. And, for a first attempt, I think it was really, really good. However, knowing, her background with romance, I feel like there was way too much of that in this book for me. And it might be that the romance aspect of the book is what has made Verity so popular. So I could be in the minority on this. This is definitely just my opinion for sure. You know, the romance develops with Jeremy in his house where his wife is upstairs, basically in kind of a comatose sort of state. She is awake, but she cannot speak. She cannot move. But she is being taken care of in that house. And Lowen is down on her luck. She's about to lose her apartment. And so Jeremy's solution is just come to the house. You're going to have to go through Verity's things to write the rest of these books. Anyway, so just move right in. And move right in she does. Even though we have the, wife upstairs in the bed, with her nurse. We have Jeremy and Verity's son still in the house, who is quite young. And it's just a very awkward situation. I I don't know. I couldn't get over that. So she moves right in. And she never, I'm trying to think, I don't think she ever receives the money, this big payday that she's supposed to get for this contract. I don't think throughout the book she ever actually receives that money in her bank account. I would be a little more concerned if I was her and I was in dire straits in my 30s and I basically could not make rent. I'm being evicted. I would be a little more concerned about my payday than about essentially trying to be close to this other woman's husband who you barely know. And he even tells her essentially that he and his wife are known for having really tragic things happen to them, like one after the other. They've had 2 children die in very tragic accidents. The first, it was a peanut allergy, and the second child actually drowned with the mother being there on the scene. So very traumatic things have happened, and then, of course, Verity's car accident has now put her in this comatose state. So, I don't know. She pulls up to the house, and there are some weird, creepy house vibes when she pulls up, but she soon forgets that, all in the name of a hunky guy named Jeremy. I don't know. Um, I just thought that was pretty ridiculous. But if you're gonna go with the romance angle, you kind of have to take that. You kind of have to take that turn. So here we are. Lowen is going through Verity's things, and she comes across this manuscript. Okay. Now, this manuscript is an autobiography. And within the first few pages of this autobiography, it looks like Verity is absolutely insane. It looks like she's lost her mind. She is contemplating, trying to um, induce a miscarriage, and then she actually goes through with it, but it doesn't work. She does this, according to her autobiography, because she cannot bear the thought of Jeremy loving someone else more than he loves her. And she's scared that he's going to love these twin girls that she's pregnant with more than he loves her. And so that was really difficult to read. There were some pretty just, I don't even know how to describe these scenes. But even after that, and you think, well, maybe this woman has come to her senses now that these children are born. No, she's even contemplating infanticide. I mean, this is some dark stuff that she's reading about. Yet Lowen doesn't finish reading this manuscript. No, she takes a break to go to taco night with Jeremy. I mean, look, I love tacos as much as the next gal, but if I read something like that, um, I'm going to the police. I'm getting out of there. Self-preservation needs to kick in. You start reading some of these things, you need to be looking for an escape hatch. But no, she takes a break because it's so disturbing. She can't believe that this woman is so insane. But yet she goes right into the next room and eats dinner with the husband while the wife is still upstairs. Just crazy. And even after that, she takes her sweet time reading this manuscript. And throughout the book, you get to read the manuscript with Lowen, and it's not that long. It's not that long. She could have finished it the first night. Um, so Steven said I need to go back and review my concepts and understanding of romance. Yeah, I think this was billed as like a thriller romance, and there were quite a bit of sexual scenes in this book, which I thought were really unnecessary. And I think again it was her kind of romance authorship kind of bleeding into this, and I guess she was writing what she knew. But at a certain point in the autobiography, Verity is writing about her life with Jeremy, and I'm just like, okay, I get it. Like, I almost wanted to skip through those sections of the book. Those were the least interesting sections of the book. Taco Tuesdays. I mean, Taco Tuesdays are great, Alan. This never heard of the book, but the wife being in a comatose state made me get Johnny Got His Gun, where in that story the soldier is in the same state. I have not read that, Brad, but yeah, definitely. And this one, with the wife being in a comatose state, the weirdest part about it was that Lowen seems to believe that she's faking it. Early on, she has this belief that she's faking it, that she is, creeping out of her bedroom at night and talking to the son, to her little son. And, if I really thought that, if I thought someone was faking something like that, I would definitely be out of that house, like, for sure. So that kind of, yeah. I kind of agree with that for sure. It's also a film. I'll have to check that out, Brad. Yeah. The something else that was interesting about this book, and I don't know, um, I thought early on it may play a pivotal part in the plot, but it didn't, and I think I was disappointed by that. So early on, Lowen exhibits this sleepwalking disorder, and she's always suffered from the sleepwalking disorder. There's much ado in the early um, pages about this. She even has an incident at Jeremy's house where she sleepwalks into Verity's bedroom and she wakes up there. And I thought that would play into the plot. I thought, well, maybe, you know, maybe Lowen is going to do something to Verity. Maybe something is going to happen while she is sleepwalking. No, that doesn't happen. And so that whole story I felt like was a missed opportunity because we could have gotten a little bit more into her backstory. We also could have gotten a little bit more into Verity's backstory because, if we are to believe this autobiography, which depicts her as this just horrific mother, this maniac who was willing to murder her children, to kind of, keep her husband all to herself. If we'd had a little bit of her backstory, I think that whole idea would have been more believable because Verity does have some sort of strained relationship with her parents. It's never really explained in the book. And I feel like if it was explained, I would have been, I guess, satisfied maybe with this autobiography and the depiction of her. But yeah, that was weird. That none of those little crumbs were followed up on. And, weird things are happening in the house. Lowen believes that Verity is faking it, yet she's still kind of drawn to Jeremy and ends up developing this romantic relationship with him right under the nose of his comatose wife. And yet, she never seems in fear for her life, really. I mean, she seems freaked out, I guess, but I would have been a bit more shaken by the things that happened in this book. Yeah, Alan. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Just let me know some dates for that and we will work it out. That sounds great. You guys always have a good time on there. Um, so, you know, again, the romance part of this really made it awkward for me. There were so many parts I just kind of wanted to skip through. However, it was fast paced. It was definitely fast paced. I read it in about a day, so it was an easy read for sure. But the ending, we get to the end, and finally Lowen reveals everything that's in this autobiography to Jeremy. And the response at that point is, well, we've got to kill her. So Jeremy goes up into Verity's room and he's strangling her. And at that point, Verity is lucid. She's actually lucid. She's able to talk to them. And so then begs the question, was she faking it all along or not? So after he tries to strangle her, Lowen stops him and says, look, you can't do this because, it, your fingerprints will be all over this. Your child will grow up with no parents. You can't do this. And so she talks him down from that. But then they commit to this plot to get rid of Verity, and they stage it to look like essentially she died in her sleep or she choked on her vomit. I can't remember exactly how they um, made that work, but fast forward, 6, 8 months, and now Lowen is pregnant with Jeremy's child. They are, either married or going to get married, and they come back to the house to kind of clean it out. And little Crew, the little boy, goes into his mom's bedroom to look under the floorboards. And he wants to get some of his drawings that he made his mom and that his mom put there. And he goes and gets them. And that's when Lowen finds a letter. And it's a letter that Verity wrote to Jeremy. And it basically explains that her autobiography was not an autobiography. It was her practicing her writing. She was writing from the perspective of the villain. And I had this idea in my head. I'm not going to say I predicted this is the way it would end, but the fact that she wrote her books from the perspective of the bad guy, from the villain's perspective, was said over and over and over throughout this book. It was like that was the main thing about her writing. Jeremy never actually read any of her books, but obviously he had to know what her books were about. And her agent suggested that she write a diary and turn her life events into villainous sort of perspective and put a different twist on things that had actually happened in her life. So in this letter, it's claiming that no, I didn't try to kill our child. I did not, purposefully let our daughter drown. I was just grief stricken and an accident happened. But Jeremy stumbled upon her autobiography and thought it was true. And he tried to kill her. And when the first attempt didn't work, he put her in the car and he drove her car into a tree. And so her car accident wasn't really a car accident. It was Jeremy trying to kill her because he thought that, she had tried to kill or did kill his kid. So the letter basically tells you, everything was a farce and Verity was innocent. What does Lowen do? Well, she just basically destroys the letter. She eats part of it, flushes the rest down the toilet, and she decides that she's willing to live with a murderer because, she's made her bed at this point. So it was just such a wild, unbelievable ending. Look, psychological thrillers, a ton of them have unbelievable stories. I know you have to suspend your belief for a lot of these things, but so many things in the setup, and it just, I don't know, so many things kind of bothered me about this. It cannot be a favorite thriller for me. It just cannot be. Perfect. That sounds perfect, Alan. Thank you. So Stephen, bottom line, is there a protagonist in this story? I mean, Lowen, I guess is, but Lowen, she's an interesting character for me because the things that could have made her a remarkable character and could have defined her or showed some sort of character growth didn't happen. And, it just, I don't know. I mean, I know people rave about it. And like I said, it was very, very readable. But when I got to the end, I was just like, oh gosh, really, really? So you're left with that. So you don't know if this is another, work of fiction. Is Verity really the psycho that Jeremy was so quick to believe she was? Or is she just an innocent person who happened to write, this fictional account um, and was the victim of her own husband's rage. Um, to have such a reportedly close relationship, this loving relationship, Verity and Jeremy, they really didn't seem to talk a whole lot about, her work and what she did, which I find very odd because, if you spend a good portion of your life actually working, you would imagine that you would talk about that with your significant other. So that was something else that I just thought was a little bit crazy. Um, so the next book right now, Alan, actually right now we're reading The Maltese Falcon for Black Hearts Book Club. We just started it a couple days ago. And Sean D. Standfast is my co-host for that. And he's actually got a couple other books coming in about the Maltese Falcon. So he's going to have a really cool perspective, I think, on that book. He's read it a ton already. And I've watched the Bogart film probably 50 times. So I'm familiar with the plot, but the book is really good. It's really, I think, what I needed right now. Give me the smoke and the shadows and the cigarette smoke and all of that comes with the detective fiction from that era. I've really been enjoying it. I'm only 4 chapters in, but that's what we're reading now. And then in April, I believe in April, the Black Hearts Book Club pick is The Remaking. I think the author of that is Clay McLeod, but that is more of a horror book, and Katrina Brown is my co-host for that. So we've got some really interesting books coming up for Black Hearts Book Club. And this book, Verity, I read for my real life book club. So there are some women in that book club who really enjoyed this book. So it'll be interesting to see everybody's different opinions. And, I feel like I was super negative in this video about this book. And I did enjoy it, but I got to the end and I was like, oh, there were so many things that I just wanted to kind of talk about and vent about. So it wasn't a terrible book, but there were some parts of it that I found were unnecessary. And then there were some parts of it that I found were, not developed enough. And nice. Yeah, I have not read The Big Sleep, Alan, but I've seen that film as well. And that one, I want to say, I should probably read The Big Sleep because I feel like with The Big Sleep, that film, there are some things in the film that I think are missing to where the plot is really difficult. Like it almost doesn't make sense. Like even if you've watched it like a dozen times. So I may actually pick that one up at some point. But yeah, um, if anyone out there watching, if you're reading anything interesting right now, put it in the chat. Just let us know what you're reading. I know Brad was talking about he was reading the Southern Victory series. So yeah, very, very, yeah. Philip Marlowe compared to Sam Spade. Yeah, that whole era of film is just so wonderful. I mean, yeah, it's great. Um, The other book, I guess, that I read recently, of course, I don't have a copy of it, um, was a romance. And, I don't read romance very often, but it was called The Banned Bookshop of Maggie Banks by Shauna Robinson. And this one was actually a really cute book. It was so sweet. It was definitely for readers because the setting is a bookshop, and it's a bookshop in this really cute little quaint town. And this town essentially makes all of its revenue from tourism related to a famous author who lived in that town. And so I thought that was pretty neat. Some really cool reads happening here. Haven't read either of those, Alan, but I've seen them on Maybe your channel, maybe Noah's channel, maybe a couple other channels. Percy Jackson, yep. Can't go wrong with that. That's always a good series. Absolutely. So the banned bookshop, even though it's billed as a romance, there was a bit of romance in it, but I feel like it was mostly a story about kind of almost a coming of age story. I mean, you had a main character who was in their 30s and they were kind of down on their luck, and their friend is going on maternity leave, so she invites her to run her bookstore for her. And unfortunately, this bookstore is bound by these really strict rules. And I forget the name. I'm trying to think of the name of the little society there. The Bell River Society. So there is a Bell River Society that pretty much dictates what the businesses can sell, because it's all related to this author. I think his name is Edward Bell. But the bookstore cannot sell any books that were published after the lifetime of Edward Bell. So they pretty much can only sell classics, which, limits their revenue. And Maggie essentially starts running kind of an underground book club where she has these book events that are really cool. It's basically like a mashup where they take a classic book and put a new kind of genre bending spin on it. So making The Catcher in the Rye a sci-fi book, or Pride and Prejudice a comedy or fantasy book, something like that. So she starts running these underground events. They're very successful. She starts selling a bunch of newer books, and she kind of has to do that on the side. And it's just a really cute story. We see the town come together. We see Maggie really come into her own and start to discover what she wants to do with her life. And yes, there's a bit of a romance in it, but it's a sweet romance. It's a very sweet romance, and it doesn't detract from the plot. It kind of adds to the plot. But I really liked that one. And I don't know, I think the timing on that one could have been why I liked it so much. I read that one right after I finished, I think it was right after I finished The Wicked Boy, which was our um, February read for Black Hearts Book Club. And that book was so dark. And the January read for Black Hearts Book Club was the most disturbing book I've ever read. So I feel like I did need a little break from the heavy sort of reading that I'd been doing. And so the banned bookshop, it fit the bill. You've got a bookshop, you've got a book convention, it was just super, super cute. So Brianna, what books do you recommend reading? Oh man. So gosh, it depends on what genre you're interested in. So is there a particular genre that you are, wanting to read right now? Because that, you know, makes a bit of a difference. One book I would say that covers kind of a few genres is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. And I know this book is really, really long, but it is one of my favorite Stephen King books. No coincidence, it has to do with the JFK assassination. So it's a bit of kind of historical fiction, but it's also kind of fantasy, because essentially we have a time travel aspect to the book. And so our main character is going back in time, and he's trying to prevent the JFK assassination, but it is so rich in detail and it really made you feel like you were back in 1960 because every time, I think it's 1960 or 1959, right in there. It's a few years before the assassination that our main character gets transported to. And the portal is in the back of this diner that the main character really likes eating at. And the main character is an English teacher. So, a really cool story. And it's one of those stories I feel like you really get immersed in. And it was pretty long. I want to say it's 800 pages or so. So it is a chunky one. But I really, really enjoyed that. Of course, whenever anyone asks you like book recommendations or what is your favorite book, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many. Um, and actually, I think I'm gonna have to pull up my Storygraph or Goodreads just to kind of look through some of the books that I've read recently, Brianna, just to kind of see what I would recommend. Um, of course, mystery, you can't go wrong with, um, some of the classics. Of course, Agatha Christie, Sherlock Holmes. But I will say, most recently, the really good mysteries I've read, they're kind of mystery slash thriller slash horror a little bit, um, are books by CJ Tudor. I really love CJ Tudor, and I would recommend, Brianna, to you The Burning Girls by CJ Tudor, because it it kind of has a bit of history to it. There's a bit of a history element to it. There's a little bit of folklore, and it's a big mystery. So that one I really liked, and it's not very long. CJ Tudor's books are not super long, um, but they are always very, very engaging. Let's see. You said mystery, action, or history. Um, I did read The Librarian Spy by Madeline Martin. That was pretty good. That was World War II historical fiction. Read that recently. Um, um, it's kind of hard to say. Is there a particular era in history that you are interested in? Because I could definitely narrow it down there too. But I have read this little book within the last week, and this is historical fiction. This is Margaret the First by Danielle Sutton. And just look at this cover. I think this cover is just absolutely gorgeous. If you're judging a book by its cover, I mean, this one definitely has it going for it there. But this book is super short, very quick read, and it is based on a real person, a Duchess, Margaret Cavendish from the 17th century. And um, I must admit, I didn't know really anything about this person before reading this book, but apparently she was a woman way ahead of her time. She is the first woman, I believe, in England to publish a work under her name, which, obviously very unusual for the time for women to do that. But, she is of the nobility. So obviously that would give her a little bit more leeway there. Um, Most famously, this woman, not only did she publish a lot of works, and she's kind of considered one of the first sci-fi writers, which is very interesting because, I don't know that many of us would think about sci-fi in the 1600s, but She is considered kind of one of the forebears of that. She was also very interested in science, and she was actually invited to the Royal Society of London, which was kind of one of the mainstays of the scientific revolution in that era. And, so she was very well known, but she was also very um, controversial and provocative. She did wear a topless dress to um, the opening of one of her husband's plays. So not only did she write plays and did she write books, but her husband also wrote a couple plays. And she appeared, at the theater, and basically with a topless dress on. And her, chest was like painted, I guess. So um, definitely caused a bit of a stir, needless to say. And so some people did call her Mad Madge, and she was seen as kind of a bit of a recluse in some sense of that. And I think that was probably because of maybe some of the backlash from, some of the things that she said and she did. Um, this book obviously is fiction. It's a work of fiction. So you kind of forget that though as you're reading it, because this author, I can't believe this author was able to do it in such a um, short work, but you really feel like you get to know this character. I mean, you feel like you know what she's gonna say or what she's thinking next, and that's saying something because she was kind of unpredictable, this gal, but she was way ahead of her time. And in the book, we get to see about her relationship with her husband. He was a good bit older than her, but it seemed like he was, for the most part, very supportive of what she wanted to do. And she definitely left her mark. But this makes me very curious to read a bit more about this woman, and to read the real history behind this. So don't know that anything I read after this will really put me into her headspace, like this little work of fiction was able to do. But yeah, really makes me curious. And I believe I'm looking on the back because I think that Virginia Woolf actually mentions Margaret Cavendish in A Room of One's Own, which is the only book that I've read by Virginia Woolf. But um, yeah, so that's kind of saying something there, because you look at that work of A Room of One's Own as a very kind of feminist work, and that work is referencing this woman from the 1600s. So definitely a trailblazer here. So yeah, that one was a good one. So if you are interested, Brianna, in historical fiction, that would be a good one. Um, a couple nonfiction actually that I've read, if you're interested in history, The Ice Pick Surgeon. That one is about dastardly acts that have been perpetrated in the name of science throughout history. So it gives you kind of little vignettes, little chapters related to different parts of that history. I'm trying to think of anything else recently related to history that I've read. The Five, that one was really good. That was the untold story of Jack the Ripper's 5 victims. And that one really made me rethink a lot of things that I've read about Jack the Ripper and how that case was um, reported in the news. Because after reading that book, it's pretty clear that a couple of the victims were not prostitutes. And, now I think when you say Jack the Ripper, it's synonymous with, he murdered prostitutes. I mean, that's what people think. So That book was very well researched. So, yeah, those are the things that I have read recently. That's all I got, guys. This was kind of an impromptu live show. I was not well prepared for it at all. I didn't really take notes. I probably rambled a good bit, probably said plenty of ums and had lots of awkward dead silence, but there it is. So I hope everyone is having an amazing weekend, and I hope you are reading something good. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. I think the next video that I do will be just a little 1 minute review of Margaret the First. And yeah, I haven't been reading very quickly here lately. I've been reading pretty slow. Just had a lot going on, a lot of things to do other than read right now. So unfortunately, haven't had as much reading time as I would like. So yeah, just yeah, thought I'd pop in and might do another one in a few weeks if I have a couple other books to talk about. But thank you to everyone who dropped in and said hello. And yeah, if you still want to read Verity, give it a go and let me know what you think. Um, Again, quick read, so it's not like you're gonna, waste a whole weekend on it. But yeah, I'll see you guys later. Have a good night.